Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 6 of Spirit of Le Mans. For those of you who may be watching for the first time, this is the series where I'm evaluating the pros and cons of each of the Le Mans prototypes on Gran Turismo 6. Now as you can see, this time we're featuring the Nissan R390 GT1 race car, which is one of the most iconic cars of the Gran Turismo series, alongside the Toyota counterpart, the GT1 TS20. But as I said, it's the Nissan for this episode. So that's about it for its introduction. So let's go straight to the track and start its evaluation. So as we've said before, on city tracks, the most important characteristics for your prototype to be good at are your low speed handling, your overall drivability, your brakes, and obviously your acceleration. So how does this Nissan fare in those areas? Well, initially, for low speed handling, I'm going to give this car a strong 5 out of 5, because despite its significant weight disadvantage when compared to the other prototypes and even the other GT1s, most of the other GT1s, it still handles really, really well. The handling is actually something more akin to a touring car than a prototype, which actually makes it quite reliable, quite smooth, and gives it a nice amount of weight to the steering, which makes you feel more confident in the car's ability. As far as overall drivability, again, I'm going to give it a strong 5 out of 5, because it's easy to learn how to drive this car, it's reliable, as I just mentioned, and the car will serve you well. It won't necessarily give you the fastest lap times, but it's an enjoyable drive that's pretty good on most tracks. Not necessarily the best at any, but it's good at everything. For acceleration, I'm only going to give it a 3, unfortunately, because although it is quick, the added weight and slight disadvantage in power does give it a disadvantage for acceleration, so only a 3 out of 5 there. But overall, on city tracks, I'm going to give it a rating of 3, unfortunately, because it's not amazingly good, but it's not bad either. So now let's go to Ascari. So on a track like Ascari, which is a moderate speed, relatively technical track, other tracks like this would be Laguna Seca, for instance, Infineon. Obviously that isn't on the game anymore, but Infineon was a track like that as well. So on a track such as that, it's your mid-range handling, as always your drivability, but your mid-range handling and more the mid-range kind of power that you're looking for on a car like this. Now, I'm going to say right now, the R390 performs at its best on a track like this. And the reason why is very simple. It doesn't have the most power, it doesn't have the best weight, and it's not necessarily the quickest, but it's the most reliable on a track like this. With most prototypes, lap after lap, you're going to start making mistakes. You're going to start wheel spinning, you're going to start shredding the tyres, and you're going to end up going off track multiple times. With the R390, that just doesn't happen. The handling is reliable lap after lap. And because you're under less fatigue, as it were, driving the car, you can put in more consistent laps over and over and over again. And while your opponents are concerned with not wheel spinning all over the place, you can just be setting those consistent laps. So overall, on a track like this, I'm going to give it its best rating, 5 out of 5. It's brilliant. It won't give you the best lap, but it is the best to drive out of the 3 track types on this type of track. For mid-range handling, I'm going to give it a 5 again, because it's very, very good. Obviously, as you just saw, it can wheel spin like any racing car, but the handling is very, very good. So overall, like I said, on a track like this, 5 out of 5. So now let's finally go over to Spa, which is our high-speed test track. So, as I've said before, on high-speed tracks such as Spa, Lasarte, Monza, most prototypes do pretty well. There aren't really any that are bad as such, but as you'd expect, some of them do perform better than others. So how does the R390 fare on a track like this? Well, as I said on the last track, it does come into its own more on higher speed tracks, but not as much, to be honest, on a very high speed track when compared to a moderate speed track. Now, as I said, it performs brilliantly on moderate speed technical tracks, But on high-speed tracks, although it has quite a bit of power, the weight does start to affect it a bit more adversely. Top end isn't as good as some of the others. I'm only giving it 3 out of 5, which is the same as what I gave it for acceleration. And although the handling, I'm still going to give it 5 out of 5 because it's very, very good. Overall, on a high-speed track like this, I'm only going to give it a rating of 4 out of 5 instead of 5, which was on the last track type. So 4 out of 5 being not bad, but it's not as good on a track like this as it is on a moderate speed technical track. So overall, pretty good on a track like this, but not perfect. It does fall behind some of the other high-speed prototypes. It's quicker than a couple of them, but still slower than quite a few. So that's it for our test tracks. So now let's go back to the garage for a roundup of this car's abilities, its upsides and its downsides. So overall, the R390 definitely isn't the best of prototypes, but it is very good. It's been very good through the entire Gran Turismo series. Obviously in the older games it was a bit OP, whereas now most people tend to kind of forget about it when it's up against cars like the Pascalos and the Bentley Speed 8 and the Mercedes Sauber C9, etc. But that doesn't detract from the fact that it's still a very good car. Now, I would recommend using the R390 in 2 main scenarios. One is if you have little or no experience in driving Le Mans prototypes. If you're not experienced with driving them, I would recommend trying out the R390 as kind of like your learning vehicle. It's the best car, in my opinion. Obviously, you may think differently, but for a new person to really get a feel for how Le Mans cars drive, because it's, for want of a better word, more difficult than your average car to drive, which teaches you the principles of a prototype, but at the same time it's far more forgiving than most of the other prototypes. Whereas if you jump into a Pascalo with no previous prototype experience, it's going to throw you off on the first corner and you'll probably never want to drive one again. Whereas with the R390, it's not perfect, but it will give you a feel for those basics. The second scenario where it's a good car is on endurance type tracks. So not necessarily endurance races, but on tracks where after only a couple of laps people start to get fatigued. Now that probably sounds dumb to some of you to say fatigue when it's only a game, but if you've ever been in a prototype race on a long grueling track lap after lap, you'll know what I'm talking about, because although it's only a game, you do concentrate so much on driving well that you do actually get mentally fatigued eventually. And when that kicks in, those of you driving Pascalos, Peugeot 905s, Audi R10s, you're going to start making mistakes. And the problem with those cars is they're so light and so nimble that every mistake you make results in spinning, shredding your tyres, ending up on the grass, then shredding your tyres more to get off of the grass, etc. And it just builds and builds and builds into more and more mistakes. The R390 just doesn't do that. It's not as quick, but it's much more consistent. It has weighted steering, which makes you more confident in its ability, and the extra weight does make the car feel more stable, more grounded, and more reliable lap after lap. So overall, I'd say its best point is that drivability. It's very easy to drive, very consistent, very stable, and it has a good amount of ability, especially for people with maybe less experience. The downside to the car? Probably its weight, I would say, because although the weight doesn't adversely affect the handling too much, in fact it actually improves it, it does affect its straight line performance a bit. It weighs about 100 kilos more than the Toyota, almost 200 kilos more than the Mazda 787B, so it is quite heavy. But yeah, that's its main downside. So overall, I would strongly recommend buying this car and trying it out. But the main piece of advice that I'd give you about it is be very selective when you use it. If you use it on the right track against the right opposition, you'll do well. If you choose the wrong track against opposition that's too quick, you're going to lose. So just make sure that you learn to drive the car well, get a feel for what the car's good and bad at, and just choose the right track, really. So as always, I'll put in the description what the car achieved out of 5, also the overall rating out of 5. I don't just pick an arbitrary number out of the sky. That is actually I work out of the 10 ways that I rate it, I tabulate all the scores into a decimal, so in this case 4.3 out of 5, and you can compare that to the other prototypes if you feel the need. And also, as usual, I'm putting the lap times that it achieved on the 3 tracks in the description as well. So that's about it really. So as always, thanks for watching.